In this video, we're going to cover the heat machines in depth. So pretty much every heat machine or machine that is predominantly about heat, we're going to do in this video. There are some other machines that work with heat later on, but these are all the basic ones. All right. So we're going to do them in pretty much the same order they are in the book, mostly with a few exceptions. So the Firebox, which I used to demo heat last video, is a very, very simple machine. You put fuel in it and the temperature goes up. Unlike most heat sources, it does not have a maximum temperature. It's going to keep going until it melts the cable or runs out of fuel. So you're definitely going to want something that can use the heat. The fuels last the same amount of time they last in a regular furnace. The one thing to note is it does have a maximum burn time at 4,000 ticks. So any fuel that lasts longer than 4,000 ticks will only last 4,000 ticks. So coal blocks and kelp blocks are fine, they won't hit that cap. Lava buckets will, so lava buckets and stuff like that are nerfed. So the super long-lived fuels aren't quite as powerful in a firebox. And it just produces a constant 10 degrees C per tick regardless of what it is burning. The companion to that is the ice box, which again we saw previously, which consumes cold things and cools things by 10 degrees C per tick. It can't cool below 20 degrees C. If you're trying to get colder than that, you're going to need a different cold source. Things it can use: snow balls, snow blocks, ice. Oh, and by the way, I'm listing these in order of how long they last. So snow lasts the least time. Sorry, snow balls last the least time, and as I say them, they're going to get better. So snow balls, snow blocks, ice, packed ice, blue ice. Okay? Fairly simple machine. Smelter, that's a pretty basic one. We should probably cover. This is the most basic thing that uses heat. It's just a furnace. It smelts things. At 1 times speed, it's basically the same speed as a furnace. And if I do that, it's just going to smelt. Give it a moment to heat up. There we go. It's about the same speed as a furnace. It's double speed at above 300 C, and it's one of those machines where it has multiple speeds depending on temperature, and where it consumes heat regardless of whether it's doing anything or not. So that's all in the tooltip, all the numbers. Thing to note is that compared to a furnace, just a firebox plus a smelter is generally going to be more fuel efficient than a furnace. So if I were to put 1 coal in the firebox versus one and then cook stuff in the smelter, typically you're going to see that you're going to get more total items cooked than you would in a furnace. Now the little caveat to that is that this has a heat up period because it's going to take a moment to get to 200 C. If this were a system, you'd probably keep it hot, so you're more efficient there. But this is going to cook more than 8 items and do it faster, so that's a good thing. Right. Heat cables and redstone heat cables we saw in the previous video. Those are the very basic things. But we're going to show one little detail which we didn't show in the last video because it's fairly unimportant and not important to the overall overview of heat, which is that heat cables actually have a very unimportant, purely decorative feature, which is that there's certain items, all listed in the book, where if you right-click them, it just changes the texture. This is purely decorative. It does not consume the item you right-click with. There's a few others: diamond and quartz. So this is just if you want, I don't know, a different color scheme. Quartz looks quite bright, diamond is tealish, and copper is the default. That also works for redstone heat cables, by the way. Heat reservoir is a very, reservoir. This is sort of a heat battery. So if we so what it does is it doesn't change the maximum temperature you're going to reach. It acts as a buffer. So if I put some coal in here, normally we expect the temperature to change pretty fast. We saw the very fast temperature changes over there. If we do that on this, we can say the temperature is very, very slowly rising. Much slower than it was when we went with just a couple cables and machines. So the heat reservoir heats very, very slowly, and if I were to connect it to something that we're going to consume heat and just a cable even, and disconnect it, it also loses temperature very, very slowly. So if you have something where you're expecting it to change temperature production quite rapidly and you want to just sort of even that out, this is a good thing to use. It doesn't consume heat or anything. Like, even though it might heat up and cool down very, very slowly, if I put 100 degrees of heat into it, and even if this thing only rises by 1 degree, I'm going to be able to pull 100 degrees out of it because it also cools slowly. So it's just a good way of storing heat. And you can also pick it up with a pickaxe, and it will store the temperature. I am not in survival mode. Hold on. Let me do that. So we see this thing's at 40 plus C. I break it, I pick it up. You can see it actually says the temperature in my inventory. I place it down, and it's kept its temperature. So you can actually use that, move that around. Also, comparators or circuits can read the temperature on it, similarly to how they do on a redstone heat cable. The next thing we're going to do is a heat sink, which is basically a temperature trash can. So if we place this down, this system's running pretty hot. This thing we configure with a wrench just by right-clicking it. So you see it's changing the mode in the lower left every time I right-click. So this just deletes heat. That's it. It just is a waste of heat. So you can see the temperature is dropping. It was at equilibrium at 300 degrees C. Not anymore, because this thing's using up the venting the heat. And it cools things down to the biome temperature. So you can think of it as a cable with super high loss, in a way. So it won't cool below the biome temperature. And similarly, we can use it over here. This thing, which is being kept cold, we can use it to warm it up to the biome temperature, which just happened very quickly because we are in a desert biome. So it can definitely pass the 0 degrees C mark. So that's just a way of getting rid of heat very quickly. Right. Next up, we're going to do the solar heater, which is another heat source. And it's renewable and solar powered, so it's quite easy to work with. You place one down, and you connect a cable to it. And we're going to see this heat up slowly. Now, this thing cannot heat above 250 degrees C, so it's capped at that. So there's that. Also, it only works in sunlight during the day when it's not raining. So if you're trying to do something at night, not so great, unless you connect it to a heat reservoir. This is one of those instances where a heat reservoir is handy because during the day, you warm up your reservoir, and then during the night, that heat you accumulated during the day is going to be able to keep things hot all night if you balance things properly. So this is definitely something you want to use with solar. Also, these things will transfer heat between each other like cables if you connect them up this way. So if you connect them end to end like this, you only need one cable. But even with multiple, they only go up to 250 C. That's not something you can get around. See? And they each make 5 degrees C per tick. But if you're trying to do that thing where you store it and use it during the night, you might want to assume it's making half that. So say it's 2.5 C per tick because you're using half during the day and half during the night. roughly. In Minecraft, nights are shorter than days, for some reason. Right, probably next I should talk about the Crucible, which is another thing that uses heat. Now, let me grab a Crucible from over here, because I've actually got a setup over here from the spotlight. The Crucible is a very high temperature machine. Unlike the Smelter, which started working at 200 C, the Crucible needs to get to 1,000 degrees C. Now, the reason I'm pointing this out is the solar heater can only get to 250. So you cannot run a Crucible off solar unless you're doing something a little more clever, which is a thing, and we're going to get to in a minute. We're going to get to steam. Steam power can be used to get around temperature limits, and we're going to get there. So this thing is very heat hungry. You can see it uses 20 degrees C, 40, 60, it runs at very high temperatures. And what it does is it melts down, it's got a whole set of recipes. So if I actually look in JEI, we can see what this thing can do. And there's 13 pages of recipes here. The main thing it does is melts down metal. That's the main thing it does. So there's molten metals added by Crossroads for pretty much every major metal. So let me display those. So you can get molten iron, molten gold, molten copper. There is no molten bronze, but you don't really need molten bronze. There's also molten copshoium, but copshoium is much later game. Don't worry about that. That is technomancy specific and very late game, so we're not going to worry about it. So yeah, molten metals for all of them. They're sort of like, they're hot like lava. And the Crucible is a way to make them. So that you can pretty much anything that's made of metal, you can put it in, well, not tools, you can't recycle tools this way. Use the vanilla method for that. You put metal things in it and it melts them down. 144 millibuckets to an ingot, as is the modded Minecraft standard for some reason. The one thing to note is this is a way to double ores. So if you put an ore in, it will make 2 ingots worth of molten metal. So this is definitely a way you can double ores. The other thing to note is you can melt down cobblestone and obsidian into lava. And that is actually really important. So obsidian gives you a full bucket of lava, cobblestone gives you a fifth of a bucket of lava. That's really important because of the next machine. Okay? Let me clear my inventory. Do I have a preset save? I think I do. One day we'll learn how to, yes. Okay. Sorry, I'm way less familiar than I should be with, there we go, with a vanilla creative hotbar system. So the next machine is the fluid cooling chamber, which I did use during that demo, during the previous video, which is generally a machine that wants to be kept cold, and it converts fluids into solid form. Now, how cold depends on what you're using it for. For example, for water, it only needs to be kept below freezing, and it will produce heat. So this is technically a machine that produces heat, but considering you're usually using it to cool stuff and you want to keep it cold, that's usually a bad thing. Usually, we're going to get to the exception. Similarly, it can cool down molten metals into ingots, but for that, any temperature below 1500 C will work. 1500 C is very hot, so basically, if you're cooling down molten metal, all you have to do is connect this thing to a heat vent, and it will keep it cool. So if I, not a heat vent, sorry, a heat sink, and if I take 2 of these side by side, and I say, give me lots and lots of, I don't know, molten iron, sure. If I put molten iron in this, it's going to be fine at first, but once it heats up, it's going to stop running. See, no more cooling happening because we've crossed 1500 degrees C, so it's staying molten. Over here, I've connected it to a heat sink, which you will remember is basically a thing to delete heat down to air temperature, or biome temperature. See the temperature's dropping from the sink, and we can just keep on cooling metal. So it's not too hard to keep cold at all for if you're just cooling metal down. And that heat, considering such a high maximum temperature, can actually be used for stuff. So I've seen lots of setups where people use their fluid cooling chamber to heat the crucible they're using to melt the metal in the first place. Stuff like that. I should not leave setups with ice around during my demo, because they have a tendency to melt and flood because I'm not keeping them cooled. Okay, sorry. So definitely you can just vent that heat, or you can try and recycle it and be more efficient. Making ice with water. Also, you can use distilled water, which is another liquid in this mod, which we're going to get to make packed ice. Or steam to make packed ice. We're going to get to steam. Now, a very, very, very important thing, which I really want to point out, is lava. And there is a reason for that, because I am going to build something very quickly. Hold on. Alright, so the thing about the heat produced by the fluid cooling chamber, when it heats something up, or when it's used to cool down a liquid, is it isn't released all at once. So even though when we cool down lava into obsidian, we get 1500 degrees, it doesn't suddenly jump the temperature by 1500 degrees. Instead, it will produce heat for 40 degrees C per tick until it has released 1500 degrees. So it doesn't make the heat in one giant burst that would probably melt any cable attached. It instead sends it out at a constant 40 degrees C per tick until it's finished releasing the heat. Anyway, this is an infinite heat machine. This thing in front of me is an infinite heat machine. And, well, actually, right now it's a venting heat machine because I've not got it connected to anything. But I should explain what's going on. This is a very important setup, and a lot of people do not realize, even though I've explicitly said this in the book, do not realize that this is a thing you can do. Obsidian takes a certain amount of heat to melt into lava, and lava releases a certain amount of heat when you cool it into obsidian. The heat you get from cooling lava into obsidian is more heat than it takes to melt the obsidian back into lava. There is a positive feedback loop here, and you can use that extra heat to run machines. So what I've got here is, I actually want more obsidian in here so it's even more efficient, is I've got a crucible that melts obsidian down into lava. Yep. That lava is coming out through these tubes. I should mention these. I never explained what a fluid tube is. I am now realizing. Fluid tubes. We know what fluids are, right? We've played modded Minecraft before. They're tubes for fluid. These are basic tanks. These are basic... We'll do this again when we get to steam in a minute, but just... They move fluid from point A to point B. Yes? Yes, we know what fluid tubes are? Good. Okay. The lava is taken up to this fluid cooler and this fluid cooler. I've got these tubes configured so that it'll prioritize putting the lava in this cooler over putting it in this one, which, I mean, I just do that because it means that the lava is going to go into this one first. And the reason that's a good thing is this cooler is doing nothing but reheating the crucible. So we're keeping the crucible heated using its own products in the loop. So this uses a certain amount of lava and produces it. And then any extra lava which isn't being used to reheat the crucible goes into this fluid cooling chamber, or fluid cooler, which is able to run machines. Now right now I've got it connected to a heat vent because I didn't build any machines. This could be, for example, a smelter, so I could run a smelter off this thing. It could be a crucible. Let me just spawn one in. So I could run this. It could be whatever. So this is actually a pretty good way of making heat, and this thing can get really hot because obsidian can cool can cool at to temperatures up to 2,250 degrees. So this is a really good way of making heat. There are definitely others. But yeah, this is one method. And you can work out for yourself how much heat on average it makes per tick. It's not a hard calculation. Just look at the numbers in JEI and subtract one number from the other, basically. So this is a very common heat source. I didn't use it here because I built these demos very, very quickly and they all run on fireboxes, but it's a good heat source. All right. So I've shown you a specific build for long enough. All right. Is it time for steam yet? No, one more thing. Salt reactor. Salt reactor is the other cold source. So I showed you the ice box, which is a way of cooling things, but it can only go down to -20°C. That's cold enough for most things, but there's definitely things in the mod that want to go colder, or can go colder, or where you get some benefit from getting colder. So for that, we have another machine called the salt reactor. Now you're going to be very confused by this machine. Just bear with me, it'll make sense once we talk about steam, okay? Doing all the heat stuff and then all the steam stuff mostly makes sense in order to explain things, but there's a couple of machines like the salt reactor where it can get a little confusing. Okay, this machine can cool things down all the way to absolute zero. It's very, very efficient. Okay? So this is a way to reach absolute zero. So you connect a heat cable to the bottom. And then it runs on fluid and salt. I know what you're thinking. What is salt? And now you're thinking, what fluid? Salt is a machine that can be made either with steam power or using rotary machines, which are going to be in the next video. So the main way to get salt is a water centrifuge, which is a rotary machine. In Crossroads, you often have to use rotary and heat stuff together. So just trust me that salt is a renewable resource that you can automatically get with a water centrifuge, which you'll see later, okay? The other thing it runs on is distilled water, which also comes from a water centrifuge, okay? Bear with me. Or you can get it from doing steam power, which we're going to see in a minute, okay? So you put distilled water and salt in here, and it consumes both of those things, and I should not have had an output pipe hooked up because now you don't get to see where it went. Okay, let me do that again. So if you put distilled water and salt in, it uses the salt and distilled water and makes normal water, okay? And it cools the salt reactor down. Now, the normal water can be pulled out the side by pipes, like that. And distilled water can be piped in the top with pipes. So if I just quickly do that, and obviously salt can just be hoppered in any side. All the water I'm pouring in here is getting used to cool it. It ran out of salt. This machine is obviously not meant to be used with a bunch of buckets being poured into manually. But see, we're cooling down quite quickly. So this is definitely a way of cooling things. And it can cool at 5°C per tick. So not very fast, actually slower than the ice box, but it can get colder than the ice box. Okay. Now we're going to do steam. And things are suddenly certain machines are going to suddenly make sense. All right, so steam in this book has actually been put in the fluid section. And we're just going to quickly cover steam and associated nonsense. Or sensical sense, I don't know. So fluids, fluid tubes. Let me do tubes properly. So tank. It holds liquid. You can put it into it with buckets or other mods equivalent to buckets. And it can store 16 buckets of liquid in there. It does exactly what you expect. You can pick it up with a pickaxe and it will retain the fluid. Not going to demonstrate that, but you know what I mean. Pipes can pipe in and out of it, as you'd expect. It's a very simple machine. You can also hook a comparator or a circuit reader to it, and they'll read the amount of fluid in there, and the exact formula is in the book, but more liquid equals stronger redstone signal. Okay? Tubes are quite fancy. They move liquids from one container, from one block to another. And I'm going to keep using water to demonstrate everything. So when I place it down, there's these little arrows on the tubes. See? I made a whole bunch of tubes, and they've made arrows everywhere. With a wrench, I can flip the direction. So there's a whole bunch of things. So going left, going right, this, which is sharing, and this, which is no connection. So I can disconnect tubes as well. And that is the direction that fluid will move. Okay? Pretty simple. So we've got it going that any liquid that goes in this tank is going to get moved to this tank. So this is empty, this is empty. I put 3 buckets in, we get 3 buckets out. They can also do sharing between pipes. They cannot share with most machines. They can share with tanks. So if I put a fluid cooling chamber here, they're allowed to put liquid in. They're allowed to say they're going to pull liquid out, but they actually can't because the fluid chamber is input only. But they can't share. They can't even show the little sharing blank thing there. So what sharing is it'll balance the percentage fullness. So if I have 2 of these set to share liquid, they're going to have the exact same amount of water in them in the two tanks, and it's also going to be shared in the actual pipes themselves. And then if I just want all the water out, I just put 1 tank on this whole line that says output, and all the water ends up there. Whenever pipes are routing, they're going to try and move water or liquid in the direction, in the one-way directions first. So if I do this, water is going to go into this tank before it goes into this tank, because going into this tank would require sharing, and going in this direction, even if I make it farther away, does not involve sharing. So pipes will prioritize. They really hate sharing. That's the explanation I've got for you. And then once this tank and pipes fill up, it'll start going into that tank. Give it a minute. There's a lot of capacity here. Is this full? Yes. But 1 more. Or, sorry, how much is in these pipes? Okay, a little more. See, it started going in that tank. Pipes are pretty straightforward. There's also redstone tubes, or redstone pipes, which, take a guess, only connect when they have a redstone signal. They do remember what they were configured with a wrench. See? But they only connect when they have a redstone signal. Alright, steam. For real this time. That was a detour and a half. There's basically 3 different machines involved in steam, and they all work together. So they are the steam boiler, the steam turbine, and the steam radiator. Steam boiler uses water to make steam. Well, it uses water and heat to make steam. So you have to get it to 100 degrees C before it starts working, which is the boiling temperature of water. So let's go over here, which I know is being kept hot. And let's just get it nice and hot. And if we put some water in, we can see it immediately made some steam, and it also made some salt. In fact, it made 10 salt per bucket. It made quite a lot of salt. So salt is a byproduct of boiling water, and it's usually a bad thing. In steam, there's other ways of getting it that are where it's considered a good thing, because heat can only connect to the bottom of this boiler, and you can only hopper out the bottoms of things. Oh, I took all the salt out, so I can't demonstrate this. That was dumb. I should have left some in there so I could very clearly show this. All right. If you wanted to pull the salt out automatically, you would need to put the hopper on the bottom, because that's where hoppers go. In fact, automation can't pull salt out of steam boilers at all. So what I'm getting at is steam boilers, if the salt in there is a bad thing because it'll clog up the boiler. If the steam boiler fills up with a full stack of salt, it'll stop running. It'll stop turning water into steam. So, and since you can't automatically pull it out, salt in a steam boiler is a bit of a problem. So how do you get around that? We'll get there in a minute, trust me. Just saying, there are other things you can put in a steam boiler other than water. Okay, so if we get a radiator now, the radiator uses steam. Now steam's a liquid. Don't think too hard about that statement. And it comes out the top here. And we're just going to put it into the side of this, in the bottom of this radiator, top of this radiator. I swear I know how to use my own mod. Is there steam in here? Is there actually steam in here? Am I dumb? Does it not go on the top? I thought it went on the top. I don't remember. You'd think I would. It does go on the bottom. I just didn't wrench that connection. Okay. Radiators turn steam into heat. Okay? So the boiler used heat plus water equals steam. Radiator. Steam equals heat plus water. I can then feed that water, which is going to come out the top. Forgive me for the worst piping you have ever seen. I'm in a rush. I can then pipe that water back into the boiler. And we don't lose any water doing this. This can be a closed loop. So it's gone back. This steam is actually getting this is actually new steam each tick. It looks like it isn't getting processed, but more is arriving as it's being used. And we can connect a heat cable to the side and use this heat for stuff. Now, why do we do this? Well, the amount of heat we get out is exactly the same amount as we put into the boiler. We don't gain heat by doing this. So why have we done this? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, there's other uses for steam than just radiators. Second of all, this heat doesn't have a temperature cap. Like the radiator can produce unlimited temperatures. Like it only makes it at 5 degrees C per tick, but it doesn't have a temperature cap. And that's a really good thing because, well, for example, on this system, our input temperature here is around 400 C at this point, and our output is still climbing. As you can see, I didn't have anything hooked up to use it, which is another discussion, but so it melted the cable, but yeah. So this is useful. So for example, I said before, solar heating can only get up to 250 C, and there's machines that need more than that. Well, if we use that to boil water in a boiler, because 250 is more than 100 C, and then use that, put that steam in a radiator, we can get around that 250 degree limit. Okay, that's a use. The other really important thing I should mention, and really should point out, is that we put steam in this radiator. And I've been saying, well, you put steam in and it makes water and heat. But it doesn't actually. If I do that, it's not making water. It's making distilled water, which is slightly different. This is another liquid added by Crossroads. It's like water, but distilled. And the reason what makes it different is if we put distilled water in a steam boiler, it doesn't make salt. So boil normal water, you get steam and salt, and then we put that normal water in, use that steam for something, and we get distilled water back, which we can use to make more steam. We've boiled the salt out. All right? So maybe you make this whole system and you initially start, and it's closed loop, so the water gets recycled, and you put in regular water initially and have to manually pull out the first batch of salt, but after that there's no salt being made, and you can use this salt for anything you want. There's a bunch of uses for salt in this mod. Enough uses, in fact, that you're going to want an automated machine to make salt at some point, which is where the water centrifuge comes in. All right? So that's the idea of steam. These two machines get used together, and distilled water and steam are flowing between them. While I'm on the topic of salt, I know this seems like a tangent, but blocks of salt actually do something. You can make them into blocks, and these blocks are not purely decorative. I don't know if you're familiar, I say, the abstract viewer, with the phrase salting the earth. Yeah, this is just gonna kill plants. If I put some flowers and stuff. Really? They're not called? Okay, sure. If I put some flowers and stuff. This is just going to slowly kill plants. We can leave that and come back to it in a minute. Similarly, salt will kill slimes, because you know what happens when you pour salt in a slug, right? Same concept. Go on the salt block. Go on the... I will place it on you if I have to. Go on the... Go. There we go. So it just kills slimes. So it kills plants and slimes. Use that as you will. Those plants are going to die over time. It's a minor thing. Okay, so the other steam machine is the steam turbine. This machine uses steam and makes distilled water and rotary power. We can use steam to make rotary power. That may seem like, well, okay, sure. That's really important. This is a way, because we made our steam using heat. Oops. And we're getting rotary power out of it. So so steam power is a way to convert steam, to convert heat into rotary power. That's a big deal in this mod. And it's a way to get around temperature limits with stuff like solar. Also kind of a big deal in this mod. So you can play this mod and do everything and never use steam at all. But it can be super convenient to be able to use steam as a way to convert your energy sources, so you can use low temperature heat sources for high temperature things, or use heat sources to run rotary stuff, so it can be super convenient. Then we can see this is spinning. We're actually going to cover this machine again in the rotary machines video, because it is an important heat source, or rotary source, sorry. And another steam machine, which is fairly unimportant, is the steamer. It's basically a smoker, but it runs on steam. So this machine is pretty much a footnote. So steam goes in, distilled water comes out, and it cooks food. That's literally it. It cooks food like a steamer, like a smoker does. Oh, hold on. Is there still water in this? I've been breaking and replacing so many pipes that I'm actually not sure if there's still water. I think this goes in the side, actually. It goes in somewhere. Yeah, it goes in the side, but we are at this point out of water in this system because I keep breaking and replacing all the machines with water in them. Let me do this. There we go. So this thing does exactly what you expect from what I've already said 5 times. What is it called? Cod? It's a very, very fast way of cooking food, and it's more efficient heat-wise than the smelter, but it only works on food and it uses steam instead. And I think that's everything for this video. Hold on. Yes, that's everything. Hallelujah. Okay. We can see that some of our plants over here have died. They've turned to coarse dirt and dead bushes. It's going to keep doing that over time. So next video's topic is going to be all the rotary machines, just like this one was all the heat machines. All right. Goodbye.